permit to fly renewal time on the Aeronca. So today's job is to replenish the oil system. I drained the oil system the other day. In fact, I stripped the aeroplane the other day. I would have filmed it, but I'd forgotten to charge the camera. I'm afraid always the problem with a proper amateur like myself. Anyway, the camera's charged today, so what I'm going to do is show you around the oil system, fit a new filter, and we'll put in about 3 quarts of straight 80 oil, and then prime the system. To prime the system, we need to put the propeller back on. I have cleaned the propeller, stripped the hub and checked all the bolts and locked it all up again. I've also done the crack test on the crankshaft, which I'll cover in another video, although I'll just drop a photograph of it somewhere around there. And then we can, once the prop's on, we can wind the engine over and pump oil from the pump up through the filter and make sure it's actually circulating before it's run next time. It's very easy to think of the Aeronca as being rather comedy, and I hold that opinion myself. It makes a delicious sound and is pathetically gutless, although it performs most admirably on its 36 horsepower. However, the engine itself is rather clever, and I would even say beautifully engineered. There's bits on it that are of course rather crude, but the oil system is very, very clever indeed. This crankcase is actually cast in 2 pieces. It's all one casting, but inside there's a baffle, and it's just below the camshaft. That's the front of the camshaft there. Now, the sump itself, which is this finned area, is completely cut off from the crankcase itself, and so it doesn't get pressurized every time the engine rotates, because being a 2-cylinder engine, of course, the crankcase volume is changing by 1860 cc every rotation. So it breathes in as the pistons go to top dead center, and it breathes out as they go to bottom dead center, and it has a breather around the other side, which I'll show you. Now, I hope you can see here, this is the oil pump. I've got my finger on. It's gear driven off the accessory case on the back here. The accessory case drives down from the crankshaft through an idler gear, which also drives the double magneto drive. Then it drives the camshaft, and then to another idler gear that runs the oil pump at camshaft speed. Now, that oil pump is also very clever because it does 2 functions. When the engine's running, the oil comes down from the rotating parts, from the crankshaft, and it sort of rains down and splashes absolutely everywhere, and it catches in a gully that the camshaft runs in, and that camshaft is also a roller camshaft, so it's on roller bearings and it has roller followers as well, please note. And then that runs through the back of the crankcase, through a hole, and into the back case, which is separate and bolts on, and it runs down to the pump, and the pump actually pumps it like a dry sump scavenge system into the reservoir. So one side of the pump is scavenge and the other side is pressure. Now, you'll notice I've got an oil filter on this. That was a modification I did about 25 years ago. It takes a Crossland 357, and basically everything that comes out of the pump output goes through the filter and straight up and meets the main gallery again. And there's a bolt-on gallery up the back of the engine. Let's try and get round to the back of it, which finishes here and pumps straight into the back of the crankshaft. So my crankshaft is always fed clean filtered oil. Pressure relief valve here relieves anything back into the crankcase, in which case then it goes scavenged back through the scavenge pump and into the oil chamber. It's really quite an elegant little engine. I've got a new filter here. It's a Crossland 357 or equivalent thereof. I'm going to fill it with oil. Usually takes some time because of the level. as it soaks down through the element and everything, the level drops. So it'll take a reasonable amount of oil. The engine itself takes about 3 quarts in the sump. In fact, it's a mistake to overfill it though, because it tends to push the oil out from around the peller flange if it's got too much in. So I tend to run it not quite full. It's a bit messy when I put the filter on, but I'll just run a oily finger around the seal there. I also lock the filter on with a Jubilee clip round the filter body, and then locking wire up onto the engine mount so it can't come undone. I generally change oil every 25 hours or yearly. I haven't noticed any corrosion problems with any of my engines over the years. In fact, the old engine that had the broken crankshaft, when I had a good look inside it after it was removed from the aircraft and I took the cylinders off, I couldn't find any corrosion whatsoever, and that's an engine that had been on the airframe. Well, it was 2016 when I took it off, and it was, I believe, 1970 when it went on. So it had been on the aircraft for 46 years, and a couple of times stored quite indifferently. It didn't seem to suffer unduly. I think the answer is, though, clean oil always. And I do, when I've got some, I must pick some up when I'm next passing Oakhampton, is I do put cam guard in here as well. I know it's very well thought of for Lycomings, and it helps with corrosion inhibition. I'm using straight 80, generally Shell or similar. The handbook recommends Shell products throughout, but it is 86 years old, and I'm sure other products are just as good these days. I don't use a multigrade. I tried a multigrade, but there was no advantage whatsoever, because the thing doesn't get hot enough to really need a multigrade oil. Even on a hot day, like the day when I flew up to Whitewater a couple of weeks ago, and it was about 24 degrees outside, and I was running at quite a high power setting, I barely got 50 degrees centigrade on the oil. So I wouldn't get any advantage in running a multigrade at all. For multigrade oils, the problem with multigrade oils is they're not 100% oil, they're sort of 80% oil and 20% of polywally doodah thickeners and all the rest of it. So straight oil for me. Right, the filter is full of oil. This is the messy bit, so cloth at the ready, over and on. Wasn't too bad actually. Just leave the cloth there to catch the bits that run off. Tighten it up. I'll tighten it again in a little bit, but that's on for now. The drain plug is already in the engine and locked up, so I can put some oil in now. One of the many lovely details on this engine is the oil filler cap, which is a little winged cap here held on with a spring clip. I'll just take that off, which is aside, and we can start putting some oil in. Now, you might think now that I'm pouring oil straight into the crankcase. Well, I'm not. Actually, the front of the crank case here has a separate little chamber that is fronted by the thrust bearing faceplate, and it means this oil goes straight round, missing the main crankcase itself, straight into the oil sump. It's all very clever. And in fact, the oil pressure relief valve is in a long pipe, and that sort of finishes about there. So if it does need to relieve pressure, it relieves it back into the sump, not into the crankcase, to add to the whirring miasma of oil. course, you're all wondering how I can tell the oil level. Well, I'm going to show you with a little bit of flourish. You have to forgive the wobble vision then. Under this little cover is the dipstick, which is a cork on a wire down in the sump. And I push that over and encourage the dipstick, and ta-da, there we are. There's the dipstick up. Now, I've put 2.5 quarts in. It's not quite full. That's more than enough, and I shall top it off once it's been run following all the work. That really is enough for now. So the last job is to put the prop back on and then prime the system by winding it through about 100 blades with the plugs out, and that way we know the pump has pushed the oil all up around the system ready for startup. Plugs are out, the prop's nice and tight, it's split pinned, so about 100 winds now to get the oil around the system. Here goes. You'll have noticed when I was winding the engine over that it It sort of makes a sound like an old man with guitar. In fact, I'll do it again. Let's see if it does it. That sound is the breather. Of course, I was explaining earlier how the crankcase volume is changing all the time because the pistons go up and down together. They both get to TDC at the same time, get bottom dead centre at the same time to give you a firing stroke every 360 degrees. Now, this is the breather. Basically, when the air is expelled out of the crankcase, it comes out of a little valve in the back here, and it hits this tin baffle. And the tin baffle's got grooves in it, and it's like a sort of centrifugal separator, and it works very well. So the oil-air mix hits the separator, it is separated and runs down the outside of this into the bottom. Now when the crankcase breathes in, there is a ball valve at the bottom here, and it sucks the air, whatever air it needs, all 1860 cc of it, through the breather, and it has to take all the oil that's collected in the bottom of the crankcase with it, and it goes into the back case. It's really very clever, and it works well, and in spite of it having kind of oily halitosis, it doesn't actually seem to use any oil whatsoever. So I've just taken that out. I've just had a quick mop around inside, cleaned the baffle. It's about the only thing you can do, is clean the baffle and then have to wrestle it back in. It goes that way round, mustn't go the wrong way round. And then it has a spring clip on top and a little piece of gauze, which I shall do now, but unfortunately the camera's in the way, so I'll turn it off and finish the job. Well, I think that just about wraps it up for today. The oil filter's tight and locked, the sump plug's tight and locked. It's got just under 3 quarts of oil all told with what went in the filter earlier. It's circulated now. It can have a little more once it's run, so I don't run it full, so actually that's sort of about right. And next time I'm down, we're going to look at the fuel system. I've got the fuel tap out at the moment for a little repair, so we'll look at fuel system and do a fuel flow check. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.